when one feels criticized, misunderstood, and powerless, this could exacerbate low self-esteem and drive further reactive or self-sabotaging behavior. So in other words, the goal is to try not to make her daughter feel this way. Hello everyone, welcome to the Narcissism Decoder. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Mazzella. Today, we're diving into a challenging dynamic. What's it like to live with and treat an individual who has vulnerable narcissistic characteristics? In this episode, we will explore how unconscious dynamics of shame and control in parent-child relationships contribute to the development and persistence of dependency and rage. I will also try to demonstrate how therapy can intervene to shift these deeply rooted patterns. As always, the patient I describe is an amalgamation of a prototypical dynamic that I frequently observe in my practice with these individuals and their loved ones. But before we dive in, let's take a step back and review, or for those of you who are new to this podcast, a brief introduction into what makes a vulnerable narcissistic individual so challenging to be around. Being in a relationship with a vulnerable narcissist can leave you feeling helpless. They often come across as passive, dependent, and stuck in life. You might find them spending their days complaining, avoiding responsibility, or leaning too heavily on others. This can be frustrating, and it's tempting to blame them for their lack of progress. But when you dig a little deeper, especially into the environment they were raised in, you begin to understand the underlying story. Since many of these individuals remain in the same environment, emotionally or financially dependent on a parent, and or living at home as adults, it offers a clear glimpse into the dynamics of their childhood and the kind of interactions they likely experienced growing up. Let's turn to that composite prototypical case I mentioned a moment ago. Can you picture a grown adult who still lives at home with her mother? She's unemployed, struggles to take initiative, and is in constant conflict with her mother. Recently, after one of their more heated arguments, her mother emailed me asking to talk. Now, typically, I would hesitate to get a parent involved with an adult child who's in treatment with me, but when the parent is financing the treatment or plays such a significant and active role in the adult child's life, sometimes it becomes necessary to understand the dynamic at play. To understand these deeper dynamics, let's take a closer look at what the mother shared about her daughter's behavior and how it reflects the patterns that often emerge in these kinds of relationships. Here's a summary of what the mother shared with me. The mother described my patient, as her daughter, by the way, as someone who refuses to take responsibility for her life. She criticized her for being too dependent, unmotivated, and irrational in her thinking. Her irrational thinking pivoted around why she was reaching out to me now at this moment. This mother was particularly upset about a recent development, something that, in her eyes, highlighted her daughter's inability to make responsible decisions. Oftentimes, what prompts these conflicts, believe it or not, is when the adult narcissistic child takes or plans to take an act of independence. I know that sounds very paradoxical, because the whole goal or the thing that the parent claims they want is for their child to be more independent and responsible. Now, coincidentally, the central focus of my work with this daughter, my patient, was around moving toward independence from her mother. So we were actually working on this in this phase of her treatment. The patient had shared with her mother that she was planning to go on a date with a man she met online. The mother told me how her daughter's decision was, and I quote, unsafe. I could hear the deep concern in her voice as she explained that her daughter was planning to meet, and I quote again, some strange guy with whom they had both shared naked pictures online. She called her daughter's decision, and I quote again, because it's important that you have these words in case you or somebody in your life uses some of these words to describe something. And I'm quoting, crazy, dangerous, and insane, and insisted that it was, and again I quote, not right for her to go on this date. Again, these complaints are not uncommon. I've heard many parents express similar frustrations, often saying that their child's behavior stems from, and I quote, hating themselves or having, and I quote, no respect for who they are. Parents describe intense frustration over things like their child not getting out of bed, not going to school, failing to take steps to clean their room, volunteer, make friends, or even find a part-time job. They see this lack of effort as evidence that their child, and yes, and I quote again here, is sick. When you hear these words that I'm quoting, we have to wonder, what makes it so difficult for parents to reconcile their child's choices, even when they may be real risk involved? In this specific example, the mother insists that her daughter's judgment is completely off. What I'm trying to capture here is not just the behavior itself, but the emotional intensity and the way this mother views her child's struggles. Many parents, and by the way, if you're listening to this and it's resonating with you, you can easily substitute the word here. Instead of parents, partners, because this stuff plays out in intimate relationships as well. But many parents, partners, but for this example, parents, often without realizing it, communicate with their adult child in ways that can come across as critical, shaming, and controlling, even though it stems from a place of fear, frustration, and a genuine desire to help. Here are some key aspects of her communication style. 1, critical and judgmental tone. This mother often uses language that shows clear disdain for her daughter's choices, calling them crazy, dangerous, and insane, while labeling her as what? Sick and not right. This kind of approach feels harsh and demeaning, which, instead of motivating her daughter to change, is more likely to make her defensive or withdraw entirely, something we see very often in cases like this. 2, shaming and pathologizing. This mother's language often centers around her daughter's perceived flaws, such as having, and I quote, no respect for herself, low self-esteem, and being a, quote, sick individual. See, again, I'm really emphasizing these labels. She labels her decision to go on a date as evidence of mental instability, saying, this isn't a sane person making a good decision. Whenever language like this is used, whether in a mother-daughter relationship or, as I mentioned before, any relationship, it creates an environment where shame and alienation thrive, making it harder for anyone to connect or move forward. 3, and by the way, this is 3 of 5. 3, overbearing and directive. This mother often speaks as though she knows exactly what's best for her daughter, positioning herself as the voice of reason. She even tells her who she should or shouldn't be dating and criticizes her decisions as, and I quote, completely off. This kind of controlling dynamic makes it almost impossible for the adult child to feel respected or autonomous in their own decision making, in their own life. 4, lack of empathy for feelings. See, there's a lot that goes on here, right? I'm just capturing. You remember I quoted these words particularly because I wanted to show you all of the emotional sort of resonance that they hold. So 4 is lack of empathy for feelings. While these parents, in this case my patient's mother, clearly cares about her daughter, her focus is almost entirely on her behavior and its risk, with little acknowledgement of the emotions or struggles driving those behaviors. For those of you who have listened to prior episodes, I always say the behavior is not the problem. It's the outcome of the problem. And that's what I'm getting at right here. By dismissing her daughter's explanation of why she wants to date this particular fellow, she misses an opportunity to connect with her daughter on a deeper, more supportive level. And last but not least, this is number 5, there's a focus on behavior over understanding. This mother fixates on her daughter's actions, such as, and I quote, meeting strange guys or showing her naked body online, and interprets them as evidence of her sickness rather than as symptoms like I was just describing. These are symptoms of deeper emotional pain and unmet needs. That's what I'm suggesting that all of you try to consider. This behavior-focused approach risks missing the underlying issues driving her child's choices. Overall, the message given is that her daughter is not capable of making any valid decisions. She infantilizes her, stripping her of agency and reinforcing a dynamic where she, that's mom, positions herself as the ultimate authority. This too fosters a dependent lifestyle. This is a painful yet powerful example of the prototypical narcissistic mother who struggles to allow her child any degree of autonomy. In this case, the daughter isn't even allowed to go on a date, a simple act that symbolizes the need to separate and grow apart from the parent. Once again, by positioning herself as the sole voice of reason and constantly insisting that her daughter is not safe and needs her guidance, the mother reinforces the idea that her daughter is completely dependent and cannot survive in this dangerous world without her. This only deepens the toxic power imbalance between them. So, now you may be asking, what happens when a parent attempts to, and I quote, help, actually trap their child in a cycle of control and shame? Let's take a closer look at how this toxic dynamic can spiral out of control. While many patients' mothers may genuinely believe that they're helping, her approach in this example only reinforces a destructive cycle of shame and control. This leaves her daughter feeling powerless and unable to trust herself and her judgment. Ironically, this dynamic could push her child to make more self-destructive choices, either as a form of rebellion or as a way to cope with the constant invalidation she feels in their relationship. There's so much more to explore about that rebellion, such as why would she share details about her upcoming date with her mother instead of just going on the date? What was she hoping to accomplish? Or how did she expect her mother would respond? These are all complicated and important questions that become part of the treatment process. For now, however, let's stay focused and go a little further into how one would talk to this kind of mother. What do you think you would do? How would you approach this situation with the mother? I want to remind you of the power of containment, something I've been describing in more detail in recent episodes. Remember, containment is a process, right? There are multiple steps to it, but it starts with validation. With this intervention strategy in mind, I have found it helpful to gently name and describe identifiable relationship patterns. Again, that's part of containment, describing one sees and framing it in a way that emphasizes, in this example, the mother's desire to help while showing her how her approach may inadvertently cause harm. And I emphasize inadvertently because we remember, like we said earlier, that this mother does really want to be helpful, and inadvertently implies that she's not doing this intentionally, at least not consciously. So for instance, here's an example of what I might say. I might say something like, "Thank you for sharing your concerns about what's happening. I could see how deeply you care about her and how much her recent decisions are worrying you." That's something I may say. That's validating. I may also say, "Your concern for her safety is evident, and it's clear you're trying to do what you feel is best for her." If I get the sense she's calmer, right? If the mother is listening to this, then I would go a little bit further. And I may say to her, "I want to address a few things because I sense that some of the dynamics between you and your daughter may be contributing to a cycle of hurt for both of you. It seems that when you express your concerns, your daughter interprets them as criticism, which makes it harder for her to take in your intentions. Did you notice that yourself?" See, now I'm trying to engage her in a process of discovery, a process of curiosity. Did you notice that yourself? To me, it seems, and I would tell her this, like such a painful cycle to be caught in for both of you. See, now, again, I may not do this all at once. And the critical piece here is if she's listening and if she's curious, because then you could go a little bit further. I wonder if there's a way to approach her. That's her daughter, right? This is what I'm saying to the mother. I wonder if there's a way to approach her where she feels more supported. If she's open to this, I might even guide her toward a shift in how she communicates. And again, only if she's open, and this has to be felt. So for example, what do you think would happen if you started by letting her know that you trust her ability to make choices, even if you still have concerns about them? You see, we'll get to your concerns. It might sound something like, again, and I'm not trying to script any of you, I'm just trying to demonstrate how one may talk to a mother like this to break this vicious cycle. "I know you're capable of deciding what's right for you, and I just want to understand how you're thinking about," and again, here, you could fill in the blank as you're listening to this, given whatever situation you may have in your life that resonates with this content. But in this case, how are you thinking about keeping yourself safe on the upcoming date? Because remember, that's what the mother was mostly concerned about, that this is not a safe environment. This is such an important shift because when one feels criticized, misunderstood, and powerless, this could exacerbate low self-esteem and drive further reactive or self-sabotaging behavior. So in other words, the goal is to try not to make her daughter feel this way. Sometimes when someone feels overwhelmed by judgment, even if it's well-intentioned, they double down on destructive or passive-aggressive behaviors that may not be in their best interest, such as, this is an example, sharing naked pictures and then telling her mother she shared them, knowing in some way this would provoke an intense reaction. Remember earlier I said this is like all grist for the analytic mill. These are the things that I need to work on in the treatment with the daughter. But this, what I'm calling doubling down, in earlier episodes, I may have referred to this as like a rebound effect, but this has been well documented in the research literature. And in prior episodes, I've tried to describe how resentment and the wish for revenge arise when the person is made to feel small, weak, incompetent, incapable, or is injured and wronged in some way. So yes, what I'm saying is if someone is full of revenge or anger, or you feel that they're being passive aggressive, rather than getting angry or trying to assert your own power over them, think about how they're feeling so small, weak, incompetent, etc. An important source of revenge, this doubling down, this rebound effect, is the sense of unfairness connected with helplessness in a context of unequal power. In other words, the strong exert authority and the weak must submit until they can rebel, of course. And that's where they get their power. When a mother, a parent, a loved one's authority and power is asserted in the way that I'm describing, the developing child and now adult child carries around a profound and deep sense of injustice. Therefore, resentment and a wish for revenge dominates the personality, and the main goal of life, despite bringing harm to oneself, is to regain power, and I quote here, win the power struggle. And this is not always conscious, just so you know. This stuff takes place in deeper layers of the unconscious. So yes, we're getting into some deep analytic stuff here. In my opinion, is the stuff that we need to get to break this really entrenched dynamic in some of these relationships. So this need to win becomes the entire framework for how someone sees the world. Yes, it even goes beyond the mother-child relationship or intimate relationship. They seem dominated by what seems to be a struggle to remain superior and to prevent anyone from getting the upper hand. In this example, who do you think is dominated by this need for power? Is it the mother or is it the daughter? Who needs to remain superior and win? What do you think? Yes, the short answer to that, if this was your guess, is it's both of them. That's why they're so entrenched and locked in this power struggle. When every interaction is a test of dominance, how does someone break free from this endless power struggle and grow? This is a complex question, and with limited time left in this episode, I'll only be able to offer a brief overview. I'll dive deeper into this topic in future episodes for a more thorough exploration. But in short, breaking free from this endless power struggle requires a profound shift, moving away from the need to always, and I quote, win, and instead facing the painful awareness of one's powerlessness. This shift is often anxiety-inducing, but it is crucial for development because it brings a much needed, and I quote this, contact with reality. And that's the goal, is to get both of these people in contact with a painful reality. In the example we've been following, this reality means what? It means the mother may need to accept that her daughter will go on a date with a man she doesn't approve of. For the daughter, it's the painful realization that her mother may never respect her decision to separate and live an independent life. Some of you may have heard of the term radical acceptance. In part, that's what I'm describing, accepting the other person for who they are. However, I want to emphasize that much more needs to happen beyond radical acceptance. That is not enough. Radical acceptance is a good starting point. It's kind of like validation in the process of containment, but it's not enough. It's not enough to break free from this power struggle. The individual must allow themselves to experience powerlessness. I know this doesn't sound appealing to all of you who are listening, but they have to experience you have to experience a deep feeling of powerlessness, sadness, and a sense of loss, rather than constantly resorting to what? To power struggles, right? That's the omnipotence. This is especially important when the focus has long been on what others have done to them. That just fuels rage and revenge. Once you're fueled by rage and revenge, you are back in the power struggle. And that's where development stops. If I could borrow from psychoanalytic theory, this shift that I'm describing aligns with what's known, and I've discussed this in greater detail in prior episodes, as, and I quote, the depressive position. Doesn't mean you're becoming depressed. Again, you could refer back. I'll try to put that in the show notes if I could find that episode. It doesn't mean that you become depressed. In part, the depressive position involves the capacity to experience loss, where helplessness is not just tied to defeat, but is felt as a recognition of damage done, leading to feelings of guilt, remorse, and despair, and then repair as well. These emotions must be painfully worked through. In my work with narcissistic relationships, this process is central, helping individuals move beyond resentment and power struggles toward a more integrated, authentic life. When I see a patient retreating into grievance and conflict, I carefully guide them toward facing their own helplessness. With tact and timing, I help them build a tolerance for loss. As this capacity grows, less omnipotent forms of reparation emerge. In other words, there's less need then to dominate the other person. And this then leads to healthier development and relationships, as you can imagine. Look, there's still much more to say about how allowing ourselves to experience powerlessness, sadness, and loss plays a crucial role in moving forward in life. There's so much more to say, but as always, I have to begin to wrap this up. And I'll try, like I mentioned earlier, to dive deeper into these topics in future episodes. However, if you'd like to talk to me directly about any of these issues, whether it's around treatment or personal growth, feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to continue the conversation with you. Okay, until next time, engage your mind and not your defensive, powerful, controlling sense of self. All right, bye for now. Disclaimer alert. The Narcissism Decoder podcast is provided for general information purposes only. The content presented in this podcast is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any psychological condition related to narcissism. The content on this podcast should not be considered a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. For specific advice pertaining to narcissism or any other psychological condition, you could reach me directly. I am an experienced mental health practitioner who is always taking on new patients. If you would just like a consultation, I can do that too.